That type of preparation didn't happen. If that had, I will tell you, Alex, I wouldn't have even gone to San Diego, let alone leave the country.
But what do you mean there were warnings you weren't aware of? Because I know we were talking about it on the news. A lot of people were talking about the problems, warning that this was going to be a huge...
So it didn't reach that level to me to say something terrible could happen and maybe you shouldn't have gone on a trip.
You know, at a certain point, you kind of have to admire Democratic politicians and what they think they can get away with, because Karen Bass is on a local news station that reported about the Santa Ana winds and the high risk for wildfires 2 days prior to her departing on her vacation trip to the nation of Ghana. And she is telling a reporter at that very station that reported it, by the way, among many stations that reported the fire risk, that there were no warnings sufficient enough at the time for her to decide to delay her vacation. Even though we all understand this is completely untrue, even though we all understand this is ridiculous in every possible way, you have the mayor actually making this case weeks later after all of this is well documented, without any shame at all whatsoever, with a smile on her face. This is absolutely maddening. This is absolutely ridiculous. Obviously, it's completely false. We're going to explain all the different various ways that you know it's completely false. But first, I will remind you that there are real-world consequences to this fire. My friend Devin Tracy, friend of the channel, his parents lost their home in these California wildfires. Now, Devin has started a GoFundMe in order to help them get back on their feet. That will be linked in the top of the description. If you can and are willing to donate, please do. If you can't or don't want to or don't like Devin, that's totally fine. I understand. I'm just trying to help a friend of mine. But without further ado, we have to get into this interview because it's insane. It's only about 4 minutes long on the local news channel's YouTube channel, but wow, it is packed to the brim with absolutely stunning lies.
I felt absolutely terrible not being here for my city.
LA Mayor Karen Bass gives us her first sit-down TV interview since the Palisades fire began and opens up about traveling on a diplomatic mission to Ghana with dangerous winds in LA's forecast.
When I say it was a mistake, absolutely, the idea that I was not present was very painful.
So you gotta love the fact that this interview opens up with Karen Bass smiling from ear to ear, looking at this reporter and saying, I felt absolutely terrible not being there for my city. I mean, I had a lot of fun on vacation in Ghana. It was absolutely exciting. We're calling this a diplomatic mission because, you know, the mayor of the city of Los Angeles is now also in charge of diplomacy with African nations. But I just felt so bad. Can't you see, based on the smile on my face, how sad I felt about the fact that I was away during the point of time when these fires occurred, that I left for this vacation 2 days after I received warnings about the Santa Ana winds, unless she received them earlier due to government agencies giving her those warnings. And of course, she decides to pass the buck to the now fired fire chief Crowley.
We know that there was warnings about the weather before you went, and you still went. What was the thought process behind going to Ghana?
When the White House called and asked me if I would represent the president, I said yes. It was going to be a very, very short trip, over a weekend and 2 business days.
So of course Karen Bass says, oh, she was tapped by the president of the United States, Joseph R. Biden, for this very important 4-day weekend vacation in the nation of Ghana, and she just had to step up and do it, even though, again, when she was running for mayor for the city of Los Angeles, she said she was not going to take these international trips. Now, I will point out that going to Ghana seems to be a common theme among bungling idiot Democratic politicians. We actually talked about the mayor of South Fulton also expensing a trip to the local taxpayers for a trip to Ghana, which he was there for, I believe, over a month. And it just seems ridiculous that all these different Democratic politicians view themselves as international representatives, and I just don't understand why. And again, I'm not saying that no Republicans do trips out of the country when they're local government officials, but there is no way that we should have the taxpayer funding these trips. They're ridiculous. They should come out of the pocket of the local representative, unless there's an actual government function related to your job as the mayor of whatever local municipality you're the mayor of, then you should get the reimbursement. But if that's not the case, like this particular case, no way it should be paid for by the LA taxpayers. And if Biden really sent her as a diplomat, 1, he's an absolute idiot, but 2, he should have paid for it. The federal government should have paid for it in that particular instance.
The mayor says LA Fire Chief Kristen Crowley did not call her to warn her in advance of the trip and didn't do the, quote, normal preparations for this kind of wind event.
That type of preparation didn't happen. If that had, I will tell you, Alex, I wouldn't have even gone to San Diego, let alone leave the country.
So right here, as expected, Karen Bass is passing the buck to the fire chief Crowley. Now, this interview, I believe, dropped 2 days before the firing of Crowley. If you guys will remember, during the course of the fires, Crowley ended up criticizing Karen Bass, criticizing cuts to the personnel and maintenance budget of her department. Now, a lot of people will spread misinformation about that. They'll say that there was no $17 million cut because after the union negotiations, they added $50 million to the overall fire budget. But make no mistake about it, the cuts were made in critical maintenance, hiring contractors to deploy the fire trucks or fix the fire trucks so they will be deployed. And that $50 million in extra money went to increase compensation and increase benefits. So the union definitely got a budget increase, but we've seen reductions in the operating budget of the fire department, and that has been disastrous. And again, it's something that wasn't started to be complained about recently. It's something that the fire chief has been on for a very long period of time.
Those are our communities, and our people will do everything in their power to protect them. It is my job as a chief to make sure that my firefighters are funded appropriately, are equipped appropriately, and they're trained appropriately. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm in this seat. I will not stop until I get that for them.
You've spoken with the Fire Commission. You have made it very clear that this department is underfunded, correct?
That is absolutely correct.
This department was asked to take a $17 million budget cut.
That is correct.
How does that affect your department?
It impacts our ability to provide service, absolutely.
How did that affect the firefight in the Palisades and beyond?
So, first and foremost, what I just said before is making sure our firefighters have the ability to provide service. So $17 million cut did not allow us to do what we needed to do. And where that impacted us specifically for Palisades was our ability to move into reserve apparatus. The $17 million cut into our ability to utilize resources that should be at our disposal that we were unable to fix because the funding was not there because of cuts to our mechanics.
What type of apparatus are we talking about specifically?
Mainly fire engines and ambulances.
And obviously, if you're making the boss look bad, if you're going after Karen Bass for her incompetence, you gotta go. And it was only a matter of time. And now we're at that point where this person is fired. So this is just the groundwork, the pretext, her saying, oh, well, she never told me about this. She never warned me about these particular fires. I mean, there was no way I could possibly know. But the thing is, the local news, just like we played in the open, is going to press her on this because this is the most insane statement that you can possibly make.
But what do you mean there were warnings you weren't aware of? Because I know we were talking about it on the news. A lot of people were talking about the problems, warning that this was going to be a huge...
So it didn't reach that level to me to say something terrible could happen and maybe you shouldn't have gone on a trip.
Why didn't
But to me, I don't know. I mean, I think that that's one of the things we need to look at.
There are now 2 investigations underway, one by LA's Fire Commission, another by the Fire Safety Research Institute.
Everything that happened, including that, needs to be examined.
So she said that the warnings didn't reach her. There was no way that she could have known. She was never told about these wildfires and all of that. And this guy says, well, how could you have not known? This is absolutely ridiculous. And again, the context that you need to understand is that the local news was reporting on these hurricane force winds. They were reporting on the wildfire risk. Specifically, they were talking about risk in the Palisades area where the most destructive fire ended up starting. And in response to this, Rick Caruso, who was the mayoral candidate that narrowly was defeated by Karen Bass in the 2022 mayoral election, ended up hiring private firefighters and stationing them around his properties with water tanks, as pictured here, in order to protect his properties, because the warnings that were available to the public through the media were sufficient enough for the mayoral candidate who lost to act upon them. But Karen Bass, the mayoral candidate who won, the person who is in office, is now claiming there was no way that she could have possibly known, which again just goes to show you that they 100% should have voted for Rick Caruso. They definitely shouldn't have elected this woman, because not only is she an absolute idiot, not only is she an absolute doof, but in addition to that, she's lying to your face because she thinks you're stupid. She thinks you're an idiot.
Have you nothing to say today?
When Bass returned from Ghana, she was ambushed by a Sky News reporter from Ireland. She didn't respond to him for several minutes, a clip that's been seen millions of times.
Your position?
Yes, it was an ambush, and I wasn't sure who he was. And that is unfortunate because I see the way that looks, as though I was avoiding. But when you're getting off a plane and you've been on a plane 17 hours and somebody hits you with a camera, I wish in hindsight my response had been better.
So again, he asked her about that viral clip. We've shown it on this channel where she's getting peppered by a journalist, and she says, look, it was an ambush, and I wish my response would have been better in that particular situation. Karen, you did not respond at all. You didn't say a single thing, and you keep talking about the ambush like you're a victim because a reporter who was pursuing a story asked a mayor who was on vacation in Ghana about the most destructive fires in her city's history that, by the way, was completely mismanaged by the city, despite what Bill Burr tells you, due to the fact that they were bungling a bunch of different things in that city, and she completely froze. She was not big enough for the situation. And by the way, we found out a bunch of different details that I've covered on this channel multiple different times, like the fact that the Santa Ynez Reservoir needed a repair that should have taken a week, and the tear in the cover that needed to be repaired was discovered in February of 2024. But because Los Angeles is run by this absolute idiot, guess what? Almost a full year later, when the fires hit, that repair in that cover was not done. So the reservoir was completely drained, and it had 117 million gallons worth of capacity. And instead, in the Pacific Palisades, in order to fight the worst fire in the history of the city of Los Angeles, they only had 3 1 million gallon backups. So even with the warnings, they didn't even attempt to try to fill the reservoir just in case they needed to fight the fire. And as a result of that, the hydrants were tapped out after a couple of hours of trying to fight back against these blazes. Now, a lot of lefties will lie to you. They'll run defense for Karen Bass, and they'll say, well, look, no water system on Earth could have prevented all of the damage from all of the fires, but nobody's making that case. What we're saying is that 120 gallons of water, the 117 million gallon tank, plus the 3 1 million gallon backups are much better than just 3 million gallons of water. Again, when there's the worst fire in history, would you like 40 times less the water or 40 times more the water? Obviously, the answer to that is 40 times more, but Karen Bass isn't held to account, and she should be held to account because that specific reservoir was actually under the jurisdiction of the city of Los Angeles, aka under her watch.
This week, the LA Times quoted former fire officials saying that the fire department could have pre-deployed at least 10 additional engines to the Palisades.
Did the city fail the residents of the Palisades?
Well, again, all of that has to be examined with experts.
What does accountability look like to you, and is it time that somebody be fired for this?
Well, again, I think it's premature to say now, but I do think that we have to examine everything, and that is going to take place very soon.
I mean, come on. The worst fire in the history of the city of Los Angeles. We just described the absolute failure of the water tank, and Karen Bass won't even say that this was mismanaged, that this was a failure, that the people who lost their homes were failed by their representatives. Then he asks her what accountability looks like to her, and she says, I don't understand the word that you're saying. That's not in my lexicon. I don't understand what you mean. Are you trying to be an evil white racist? And by the way, I think I'm joking about that, honestly, and I hope I would be joking about that, but there's this clip from the Majority Report where people in these left-wing audiences have said that all of the criticism of Karen Bass, all of the critiques of her response, all of the criticism of her going on vacation 2 days after receiving the warnings is actually evil white racism. And that's not a joke. This is the call. I played this clip before. Let me play it again.
DSA Josh, I live on the west side of LA. All the criticism that conservatives are directing towards Mayor Karen Bass is 100% motivated by white nationalism and violent misogyny. They're fascists, full stop. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you can say 100% of anything is anything these days, but certainly it's when you start hearing people talking about DEI.
Yeah, that's Nazi stuff.
Do we have that Bill Burr clip?
The reason why Karen Bass is able to act the way that she's acting, duck accountability, is because she knows a certain percentage of the Democratic base, a certain percentage of the progressives will defend her based on her race and based on her sex, no matter what. These people would rather burn to death in their own homes, die from smoke inhalation, than ever have somebody accuse them of being an evil white racist, even though all that is expected of her is to be at least as competent as the guy that they didn't elect elect to be the mayor of the city of Los Angeles. They just talked about how they could have deployed 10 extra fire trucks in and around the Palisades. Well, guess what? Rick Caruso, the guy who wasn't the mayor, ended up using the warnings from the news media, the ones that Karen Bass had no idea about, the ones that she never heard about, in order to do that for himself. All we want is for Karen Bass to be held to the same standard as a competent white person, but all these lefties are just obsessed with the black girl magic, and that even allows her to elude the word accountability in this particular interview. It's absolutely shameful. And by the way, it's disrespectful to black America. It's disrespectful to black women. This is a soft bigotry of no expectations. I mean, quite literally, you can have the worst disaster on your city's watch, fail it in every possible regard, and you'll still get defense run from you by the progressive left, by these woke idiots.
How do you assess the job performance of the chief of the fire department?
Well, I think that that's something that has to be assessed. I need to understand why things were handled differently this time than they've been handled before.
And why do you think that is?
I'm not sure.
So two things. First and foremost, Karen Bass obviously agreed to do this interview because this guy is putting forward the angle that she wants to hear, which is the fire chief is responsible. The fire chief is to blame. The woman who coincidentally called out Karen Bass, the woman who coincidentally criticized her not just after the fires, but before the fires for the way that money was allocated to the budget of the fire department in case of wildfires, she is at fault. So obviously this is a setup in order to basically lay the groundwork for that woman's firing. And again, regardless of what you might think about her separately from this, she is not being fired due to incompetence. We're not hearing any criticism of the person who's managing the water reservoir from Karen Bass. We're not hearing accountability for that six-figure position. What we're hearing is only accountability for the one official that dared buck the trend and step up to Karen Bass. Also, in addition to that, the angle when they cut back to the news reporter is absolutely terrible. I don't know who framed this shot, but what the hell are you doing? Just because you're local news doesn't mean you need a high school level production.
We met up with Mayor Bass at the Impacted Worker and Family Recovery Center, now open in Culver City. It's one of 4 locations for those impacted by the fires.
And it doesn't matter where you live, where you're from, you can come here and get an array of resources, from direct cash assistance to unemployment, job assistance, training.
I asked, what's a realistic timetable for rebuilding the Palisades?
3 years would probably be the fastest, but probably it would be more like 5. So it really depends on the individual circumstances.
Again, do you guys remember when the evil orange man was sitting down next to Karen Bass and he was talking about how it was going to take 18 months in order to get a permit, in order to remove the debris from the property? Well, Karen Bass said, no, that's absolutely ridiculous and absurd. We're not going to make the process take that long. It's not going to take a year and a half for you to just clear the property and then, you're going to end up with a 3 to 5 year timetable. Well, she just said 3 to 5 year timetable. 3 to 5 year timetable. After all the promises, after all of the lies put forward by her and Gavin Newsom, now all of a sudden she's just admitting that it's right. She's like, 3 years is the absolute minimum, probably 5 years. So, you guys are kind of out of luck. You're just going to have to deal with it. Also, we're going to be against people buying up these properties, so you can't even really sell them because that's just speculation and that's bad and that's terrible. So yeah, this woman is incompetent from top to bottom, but she will have her defenders no matter what. Again, when you have the magical shield of racism and sexism, you going off to go party in Ghana 2 days after you receive warnings about these fires can just be brushed aside because, God forbid, we elect somebody as competent as Rick Caruso, who, took the warnings from the media, who saw the warnings on television and on the internet.com and was able to stage private firefighters around his properties in an intelligent way in order to protect them. And by the way, Rick Caruso owns properties all over the city of Los Angeles, but he knew from the warnings from the television to put them in the Pacific Palisades. He knew from the warnings from the TV to make sure they had their own water tanks, so that way they didn't have to rely on the infrastructure, on the hydrants, which of course were running dry due to the fact that, again, Karen Bass's mismanagement of the key reservoir in that area was totally lacking, was total incompetence from top to bottom.
The mayor told me she's committed to running for re-election in 2026 and winning over her critics.
And they don't have faith that you can lead the city right now.
Well,
what do you say to those critics?
It is my responsibility to disprove that.
Yeah.
It is my responsibility to prove that I can lead, and I am, the rebuilding and the recovery process.
I mean, this is just madness, people. If you're a resident of the city of Los Angeles and you lost your home and you're watching her grin her way through this interview, talk about how she had no information when you yourself received the warnings, when you got that information, again, prior to her leaving for Ghana, when she ignored those in order to go on that vacation that she promised you on the campaign trail that she was not going to do, you have to be furious. You have to be enraged, or at least I would hope you would be enraged. But I'm sure some of you are like, well, I'm upset that, she's completely lying and now she's saying a 3 to 5 year timetable. And in addition to that, she's basically scapegoating the fire chief and nothing's going to change and we're at risk for the consequences of her piss poor management of situations like this. But I don't want to be called an evil white racist. I mean, oh my God, I'd rather burn to death than have that label hurled at me disingenuously by an idiot leftist in Sam Cedars' audience. Oh my God, that's just so heartbreaking. That's just so sad. It's so devastating. Look, honestly, this whole interview, unbelievable, ridiculous from top to bottom, and I don't want to talk about it anymore. So that's all I really have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, then show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about, of course, Karen Bass doing a sit-down interview saying she had no warning, even though we all know that's false. Till next time.